Hello everyone, and welcome to Unicast, the University Podcast. I'm your host for this miniseries, Flux, a student of Science and Computer Science at the University of New Brunswick. So, welcome to our third episode. This one will be the first of few that I pre-record as finals begin to come around, and today we're going to be discussing tutorials, labs, and clubs and societies. So sit back, relax, and let's begin. So, we begin today's episode with a discussion on tutorials. If you made it past your first few classes, like I discussed in my previous episode, then your professor has probably begun to discuss the probability of a weekly mandatory or non-mandatory tutorial. Now, tutorials in university are quite a bit different than those in high school. In high school, you may have had one or two situations. The first being you had a tutor who was often a student, sometimes a trained university student or even teacher, who would tutor you one-on-one at times you both agreed on. Sometimes you paid them, sometimes they're paid by the school or did it for free. The other possibility or other situation was you had a teacher who would sometimes do tutorials before tests or exams for the entire class, which was really nice but also really rare. Well, in university it's actually quite a bit different. In university, classes are only 3 hours a week instead of the semesterized schools 4, 5, maybe even 6 hours a week. And because of that, professors don't have that long to teach the same amount of material that they would have to in high school or even more. So because of that, these classes, or lectures as they're known as in university, are almost completely devoted to just getting through the material and making sure that everything is touched on and everything is taught in some way where you'd be able to understand it and be able to figure it out more upon reading the textbook. And this leaves no time for a professor to hand out worksheets, to hand out quizzes, to hand out assignments, or give you any information for how to do questions better or more personally or in more detail. So because of that, most professors in most universities, as from what I've seen, will set a weekly time every week where they'll be in their class or in a designated room teaching the material more personally and answering questions in a much better way. Now, as mentioned, there are two types of tutorials in university, both of which we have to look out for, and those are non-mandatory tutorials, which are my personal favorite, and the more mandatory tutorials in a class. And seeing as these are quite different, we're going to discuss each one individually. So, to begin, we're going to discuss non-mandatory tutorials. Now, non-mandatory tutorials are much more how they sound, a tutorial where you don't have to go and it's more open. Now, I mentioned these are my favorite because to me, these are the more important types of tutorials. The professor here has decided that they can teach the material relatively well in their class, or the textbook and assignments online can teach everything to you, and they designate this tutorial for people who are struggling and need a little bit of extra help, or people who have a few questions they need answered. These tutorials are usually drop in, drop out, figure things out as you want, and just ask questions, and with no huge plan for how to go, except maybe a few extra questions. Now, these tutorials are personally the most helpful for me because, as said, you don't need to go unless you don't understand. So if I have a week where I understand what's going on and I want to work on something, I don't have to go to this tutorial. But if I do need to have some questions I need to answer, I can full well just go to the tutorial and ask the professor a few questions. So it's worked out really well, and I personally saw it as really important, especially before a test or exam. Now, in university, tests or exams are much more rare. As I said, there's much less time to have them, so you're not going to have as many in a semester. So being able to go somewhere when these tests are actually happening and get some professional studying done is quite nice, because when these tests do happen, they're usually quite large, near midterm size. So when a test or exam's coming around, it's nice to be able to go to the tutorial and get my questions asked, get some extra study material, and make sure I know everything that I've been studying. And I found it quite useful. My school likes to say that 1 hour in like a professional tutorial is like 3 hours studying on your own. And honestly, it sounds quite ludicrous, but that's actually pretty accurate to how it is. Now, there is another type of non-mandatory tutorial that we need to discuss, and that is, as my university calls it, peer-assisted learning, or even more like your high school tutoring. So, peer-assisted learning, or just tutorials from other students, is, as the second term for it sounds, you have other students, either graduate students, undergraduate students, whatever, sometimes even professors who are really in on it, will sit down with the group and more one-on-one help out students and answer questions and provide more material and help them solve their exact problem instead of just explaining the material better. It's like the tutorial where you had a much nicer environment, but now even better and even more personal, much more like those in high school. Now, this is especially the one you want to look out for if you have a lot more questions or need extra help, because a course is pretty annoying. Though these courses are pretty hard As you go in upper year, it's pretty hard to find people who can do tutorials for these courses, as they're no longer first year courses and they're stuff that is not as often done. Like a fourth year chemistry course, I can safely say the majority of students don't do. But if you can get something like this, it's definitely good to look at and consider going to them, as while they are still organized as a weekly time, they're much more useful for being personal and making sure you understand the material yourself, something that you might not and something you might need help with, right? But the other type of tutorial that we need to discuss now is the mandatory tutorial. Now, these types of tutorials are my least favorite, but there's still something pretty critical to university life and still something that's important to know. Now, a mandatory tutorial is also pretty self-explanatory. It's a tutorial that you have to go to every week. Now, a professor could have many reasons for deciding to do this. Some professors treat their tutorial period as an extra hour to teach you instead, because let's be real here, 3 hours a week's not a long time, and if you have a pretty dense course and you want to spread it out a little bit better, 1 extra hour a week makes a huge difference to spread out your course and make sure you can give more detail at all times instead of sometimes. So that's usually the first reason. Another reason could be a professor sees their class as particularly hard or particularly challenging or just important to get extra work for, and so they have a mandatory tutorial to guarantee that you get extra work to know what you're doing. My Java class does this because Java in first year is known for being particularly rough on students, so they take the chance to actually make sure all students understand instead of just letting you come ask questions. It is a lot more structured, so if you don't know what you don't know, this is actually really useful because they give you the extra work for it and guarantee they have something there. So there's not only downsides for this. Now, another reason for these mandatory tutorials, and my least favorite reason for them, is some professors don't have time to give assessments during their classes, so they give their assessment during their tutorial time. Now, as I said, this is my least favorite because it takes away an hour that you can budget for yourself really nicely and turns it into a stressful hour where you have to do work each week for assignments. But not always is it like this. So to give a few examples, when it comes to tutorials where we do work, my physics class is the best example. In my physics class, we have one tutorial on Friday each week. This tutorial is like 3 hours long, but you can come in and go whenever you want, and it's probably going to take you about an hour, so it's a bit more reasonable than you think, just more open for if you need to set appointments at certain times or whatever. And what you do is you go in and you're given the assignment sheet, and a few teachers will be there, or a few professors, and a few teaching assistants. And you will work with other students, or by yourself if you wish, on an assignment that they pass out, and then you can ask them questions, figure things out, and then when it's done, you pass it into them. Now, you're probably going to get 100 on this because you can ask them specific questions, they can check it over for you, and you can ask other students. So for my physics class, this form of structure is more of a structured tutorial where they give you material, where they guarantee that you're going to do the material, try your best to make sure it's good because you're getting a grade. Now, the flip side of this is something that my friends have had, but I haven't had, a tutorial where the work is mandatory, it's an assignment where you sit down, write it, and leave, and where it's just not a fun time, where it's basically a test class or a test block every week. Now, I said I haven't had these myself, more of my friends have, but I can safely say from what I've heard, they are not the best situation, but they are still highly important to be aware of and to make sure you schedule this time, because if you don't schedule this time, you're going to miss a lot of assessment and you might not even pass your course. So keep in mind this is a possibility. Now, the other forms of mandatory tutorials that don't make it assessments are still good to keep in blocks of, and keep in mind that they will be things, and to double check with your professor if they don't tell you if the tutorial is mandatory or not, and make sure you know if it's mandatory or not. Even if it's not mandatory, it's still good to look into going for extra work, but if it's not mandatory, then you have your extra hour and you have your extra time to do work if you need it. But still, it's good to look into these tutorials and remember that they're quite important and quite advantageous to go to. And with that, we're going to move on to our next discussion for today, labs. So, now that we've had the chance to discuss tutorials, there is something else in university that's extremely important for me to talk about, even though I might not be able to make a 10-minute segment out of it. And that thing is labs. Now, if you're not a student of science, computer science, math, or that area of classes, you probably won't have any labs to worry about. You'll probably have something else. But if you are in these areas, then you definitely do have something called a lab in your schedule that is extremely important for you to fully understand. And just like with tutorials, there are two types of labs for us to talk about. The first being an in-class lab, which I personally don't have. Well, actually, I personally have one. And a lab that is a class in and of itself. And we're going to start this with labs that are in class. Now, in-class labs are as self-explanatory as everything else that I've said this episode. They are a lab that is extra time in a class to do extra things the professor may want. Now, you might see a class like a Java class or a math class have this extra 1 hour, 30 minutes, maybe 2 hours block that is scheduled as a lab. During this time, it's highly likely that you'll be going to a room designated by the professor that's usually not the classroom, and you'll be working on some sort of weekly project that guarantees you know what you're doing and will be sent in for marks. Now, these labs I personally find to be quite nice because if you have a class where you don't fully know everything that's going on, they give you a chance to do work the professor couldn't originally give you in class and also not give you during the tutorial, where you can still ask questions and figure things out on your own and with personal one-on-one help. And these labs range in what you'll be doing during them. In my personal Java lab, what we do is we have a coding assignment for the week. In 1 week, we'll do an assignment where we do it by ourselves, and the next week we'll do an assignment with a partner that we'll do together, and it alternates weeks like that. And I know from the calculus class at my university, the labs that they do is they have something called WebWorks, where it's basically a math assignment they can do while asking personal questions about the assignment instead of needing to worry about sending emails or anything of the sort. Now, both of these labs are perfectly valid in the way they do them and are very good ways of having the weekly lab without needing to worry as much about tutorials or giving extra work for people to do at home. It's a really well blocked out set of time for you to be able to do your work and guarantee that you understand everything in a class that definitely has a lot more than it can explain in just a tutorial in classes, and definitely needs time to explain these things to guarantee that you know it. And this is especially true for computer science classes, because computer science classes have a lot of coding aspects to them, and while maybe a 3-hour full-on lab is a bit intense for a coding project, you definitely need some sort of time with a computer where you can do coding and ask questions to guarantee that the student knows what's happening, and this is the perfect chance to have that exact situation. Now, the next type of lab to discuss is something that's much more interesting and much different than this lab added onto a class, and that's the labs that act as their own classes. Now, these labs I found were more common in the science faculty that I'm in than the math or computer science faculty, and I think they're also quite common in the engineering faculty. Now, these labs are going to be 3-hour labs done all at once. So basically you're doing a full weeks of classes all at once, and then you'll be doing nothing else. And during these labs, you'll be doing either experiments or projects or work or something of the sort. I have labs like this in my chemistry and my physics classes. I think that's pretty much the classes that will have them going through. I know biology does it, and most engineering classes also do this, where we'll go in, usually to have some sort of pre-lab test or pre-lab quiz, which in some of them we'll do that on our own, and in other ones we'll actually do that in the lab. I know my physics one, we do it before the lab, and chem we do it during because it's more of a safety test for chem. And once you get that done, you'll go into the lab and do an experiment. In my chem lab, we do stuff like titrations, if you've done those yet. We do stuff like, well, working with acids and bases. We've worked with forming copper into many other compounds and then back into copper. Our first one was just weighing sand and working with sand just to make sure we knew the lab equipment. So these 3-hour labs do have quite a bit of importance to them because they are doing a lot more than you could do in an hour-and-a-half lab. I know my physics lab is quite a bit different, and while most people's physics lab is just a 3-hour, do an experiment, kind of like chemistry, then move on. The physics lab that I have is more, they give vague instructions and you develop your own experiments to get the answer, and if it doesn't work or if you feel like it can be done better, you develop it more, plan it more, build it up more, and then get back to work, try it again, and repeat the cycle over and over until you have something that, well, works and was a really good functional experiment. And these labs you're probably going to have more of in your early years if you're doing science, and you probably might have less of in your upper years until you do something like an honors thesis or a research project or like experiments in physics or experiments in chemistry instead of taking a theoretical class. And if you're at a university that has much more focus on experimental, you'll definitely have more labs than ones that are more theoretical. It also depends on your degree program and such. But yeah, those are the two types of labs that you'll expect to see in university. And there's definitely more examples in the labs that I haven't taken because you can only take so many a term with all your courses before it begins to get a bit overwhelming. But all in all, these are the labs to look out for, and it's good to remember what they're like and how to look at them. And remember that these labs are nothing too big, nothing too extravagant to think of. They are simply just a chance to run an experiment or get some extra work in, and are really should be treated just as such. They're nothing more than the same as another class where you're just going to work on a project and work more hands-on. It's definitely good for these classes to remember that you're not going to be doing as much studying, but they require a lot of preparation each week, and not to skimp out on this preparation or you might mess up your pre-lab quiz. And if you mess up your pre-lab quiz, you can't do the lab. So remember, for these courses, while they are definitely a lot more chill than a normal course, of course they are maxed out 3 hours a week, they are still a course that you're taking, and it's still good to remember that you have to be prepared for them. You might have to do some studying, and you have to make sure you know the material that you're working with to do the lab. It's not something you can just laugh about and just go in and wing it, but it's also not something you need to worry about as much as other tests. And well, I know some people will ask this, because I have asked this myself, most labs do not have an exam at the end of the year. At least my physics course, most engineering courses and the such, don't actually have final exams. Instead, they have a final big experiment for you to do, and that is how they're going to give you your final grade, because after all, labs are testing what your abilities that are hands-on, and doing a theoretical test or a test on paper makes no sense when they could test how you do hands-on. Now, my chemistry lab is actually a bit different, and some labs are also going to be like this, where my chemistry lab actually does give a hands-on test to make sure you understand the labs you did throughout the term or semester, to make sure that you have an idea of everything that's going on, and that you know why you were doing this and why you're doing that, and what you're fully doing. Though something like this will be discussed much more during a discussion on exams, which will be happening at a later week once I've had my first exams. And with this, we'll be moving on to our last scheduled topic for today, which will be clubs and societies. So it might not be our last topic depending on the time that we have. So, now that we've finished our discussion about labs and tutorials and such, we move on to the topic that I was personally anticipating the most for this episode, and that's clubs and societies. Now, at universities, clubs and societies, while they're done differently from university to university, are probably one of the most entertaining and important things to look into at university life. Clubs and societies are quite a bit similar to what the ones in high school were like, but a lot bigger and a lot more important. In high school, you might remember these small clubs of a few people playing chess, a few people having debates, a few people, I don't know, looking at computers, a few people doing video games, a few people playing D&D, and all of the sports groups in your school. Well, in university, these are much, much bigger and much, much different. In university, you'll have a wide variety of clubs to look at, and societies to join, and of activities that you can make part of your day, and then even put onto a resume because you were an active member during it. And it's good to go over some of the different types and what to expect during them, and if you want to start your own club, I can also take a few minutes to discuss that. So let's start with the different types of clubs you can expect at a university. Now, it would be an easier question to answer what clubs can you not find at a university, but even so, let's take a look at some of the things that you will expect to find. Now, the first and foremost club or society that you'll find at university is probably the one you would expect me to hear me say first, so I'll say it quickly and get out of the way. And those are your sports clubs. These are the clubs where you play badminton, where you play tennis, where you play soccer, football if you're in Europe, where you play football, rugby if you're in Europe, and a wide variety of sports other than the ones I listed. And these are about what you expect. It's a full sports team with full-scale training and full-scale practice that will have their meets to do practice and have their competitions at home universities and other universities all the time, where you can go play your games and get some valuable life experience, both physically and mentally, that you can put on resumes. Now, the next type that you would expect to see at a university is what we call the academic societies. And these academic societies are a lot less like a club than you would expect, and a lot more like an organization. These societies are usually actually run by professors, graduate students, or fourth-year students in their undergrad degree who decided their faculty needed a society. And these societies will be the ones hosting math tutorials, if it's the math society, or physics tutorials, or whatever. They'll be hosting events about a society, about a specific topic that within a faculty, such as the math faculty talking about a seminar, same with the physics faculty, maybe the computer science faculty discussing a competition, and the business faculty talking about a business that recently formed and needs some people to work for them, maybe over the summer. And these faculties are kind of the hub for your studies within a program outside of just your grades and outside of your assignments and outside of your classes. It's your chance to get some tutorials and interact with others who are just like you, and to get some insight on things that pertain directly to you from people whose life is directly attached to the same program that you are, and who might have more experience and might have done this before and have a lot more connections that you might want to tap into. And after the academic societies, which we'll definitely get into a bit later, there's also the cultural societies. Now, these cultural societies or cultural clubs are less of what you would expect just from hearing the name, but also pretty easy to think about after just a couple minutes. Cultural societies are societies, well, focused around a particular culture. They have no particular rules for what defines them, except that they are devoted to a certain culture. So a certain culture, a certain group of people, a certain place, etc. So these cultural societies might have something like a food society based on Japanese dishes. So this might be a society that is focused on making sushi and making other traditional Japanese dishes and even popularized Japanese dishes. Or you might find a society like one my school has, the Chinese Society, which is a society where students who are Chinese or students who are interested in Chinese culture can go to learn more about it and interact more about it with people who are authentically from the country, like actually natively, not just authentically, from the country, and people who are interested in learning directly from people who are from the country. So you can get a chance to interact with the culture more one-on-one. And there's many more examples of this. There's plenty of clubs that are based around a specific culture, such as the German Culture Society. So instead of focusing on the food or instead of focusing on the people, it just focuses on the overall culture of the place that they're looking at and of the group they're looking at. I've also seen cultural societies based on religions even. There's definitely cultural societies that are more like the Islamic Society or the Christian Society or the Jewish Society, Buddhist Society, whatever religion you can think of. You can also found your own if it's not there, so don't worry, these are not exclusive groups. But they all have the same goal of exploring and interacting with the culture in a way that is more real to the culture instead of a more fake-in version that you'd find in North America or Europe. It'd be like, instead of going to a Chinese restaurant, like an American Chinese restaurant, you go down and get food from someone who is actually Chinese, cooking actual Chinese dishes. So it's a much better way of interacting with the culture in a more real way of taking a look at it. And the final type of club, that, or at least the final category my university decides, is known as the special interest section. And these types of clubs here are probably the most important ones to look at if you can't find one that you really like within the other three sections, or just for the most unique, most advantageous, most adventurous, and most promising clubs at a university. And these clubs, well, it's basically an etc. section, is much more than just an etc. section. These clubs range from archery clubs to debate clubs, to a boating club, to an emerging technologies club in my school, to a computers club, to a coding club, to a business startup club. That's actually a thing that you're allowed to form. To any other type of club you can imagine that doesn't fall under just a culture or just an academic society or just a sport. And these clubs are usually some of the most ambitious, some of the most promising clubs at the university, and they're the ones I'm going to be devoting most of my time to in this discussion. To me, special interest clubs are the most important, if I didn't state that 100 times already. These clubs are the types of ones where they have new leadership who are really excited about a topic and really passionate instead of just doing it as a sort of formulaic type of thing. These are the clubs that think of the weirdest things that people could be interested in and really spend a lot of time and a lot of effort working on it. These are the types of clubs where you walk in and just because you have a similar type of interest, you are welcome and you are a member of a new friend group, really. These are the types of clubs where instead of working towards a sport and only working towards a sport, instead of taking your time to just embrace a culture, instead of focusing on an academic faculty on a more personal level, these are clubs where it's an internalized friend group, an internalized group of people you can see as equals and see as those you respect, while also looking towards either competitions or activities or leadership roles or just some fun at university. I know, you fully could go to university, look at the clubs, and see that maybe there's no Dungeons and Dragons club. That's something I would look into personally. And seeing this, you're like, okay, well, let's start a Dungeons and Dragons club in the university. And you do it, and you start the club, and maybe it's a bit rocky at first getting some people in, but eventually you get a group of maybe 10, 15 people even, which would be crazy but amazing, who come every week just to play Dungeons and Dragons for a few hours, or maybe every month, or whenever you hold it, and just enjoy each other's company and enjoy doing the same thing together and enjoy embracing the same interests. And in the process, because you started this club, you now have a leadership role, which counts as an elected position if you get elected back in, that you can put onto a resume. And you can also say you were the organizer, you were the primary advertiser, you were the treasurer, the secretary, or whatever roles that you took in starting the club and in maintaining the club. These all can go on a resume, and all you did was organize a meet for Dungeons and Dragons and make sure that it stayed afloat and made sure people came. You embrace your passions in ways a class cannot, in ways a sport cannot, and in ways that a highly structured event held by adults in maybe their 30s or 40s cannot embrace you like a friend group can. You have the chance to go really meet people who have similar, maybe obscure interests to you. Who knows? Maybe you're just really passionate about, I don't know, carpets. I found an Instagram account that did this recently, actually. You're just really passionate about different carpets and different designs and different aesthetics for carpets that you could find. Well, if you can find a few other people like that and want to meet a few others, you can make a club about it. And as long as your university approves it, you could definitely have a club of people interested about carpets, which sounds really weird, but at the same time, if that's what interests you, you can do it. And you can meet others like it, and it gives you something to put on a resume. It gives you something for your future. You're genuinely being productive, embracing whatever interest you may have. And this goes beyond just the standard book club or archery club. This goes into literally anything you're passionate about. You could even start clubs that are effectively under other brackets, but really fit perfectly in this passion idea you have. Like, my university has a blockchain club, which it doesn't really matter if you know what blockchain is or not. It's an emerging technology that's showing some promise, and while I'm not a huge fan of it, they have many members who come to learn about blockchain and to discuss ideas about blockchain and figure things out and really just have fun with it. I know plenty of universities have debate teams, which, while that's a more standard one, is still a group of people who decided we want to just debate and practice debate and have fun with arguments and possibly even do this on a national or provincial, national, or even international level competitively, because why not, right? These special interest clubs are some of the most important things to look at in university. And while maybe it's not your thing to think of, oh, let's go join a club, it's still definitely something that'd be super important to look into and to try. Because for all you know, in just going to a club and just enjoying an activity you like, even if it's just a movie club or a debate club or who knows, a book club or something, maybe a metallurgy club, I think that'd be quite interesting, right? You're still you have the chance to meet a friend group. You have the chance to explore an interest. You have a chance to just have fun and do maybe what you're already doing at home, but now either with other people there or with the chance to make friends or make it a competitive thing. Like, these clubs are the best chance to meet other people like you and to explore interests you have and to take leadership roles and to get things on your resume while still just having fun with your Dungeons and Dragons, right? Or your video games. My university has an eSports club, which is ran by just people who were once students and have now graduated, or people who are students now. And we just go and play video games and have internal tournaments that really, if not for prize, just because we have fun with video games. But at the same time, we have a full-fledged competitive team who go out to other provinces and compete in esports tournaments. And we have a set of like actually trained leaders who are leading the club because they've done the training, and it has so much to put on a resume just because they felt like playing video games with a larger group of friends and making it a thing on university. Like, this is such a promising opportunity, and I don't want to downplay the other three brackets. Well, I'm not a huge part of the other three brackets. They're still highly important. They're still very similar, but they have this focused idea that is usually pretty structured. But these special interest clubs are your chance to explore your own interests. Maybe you're like me and you are really, really passionate about politics, but you don't want to create this debate and this argument about politics that turns, well, I hate to say political, but political. It turns into a full-on fight argument about your personally held beliefs. Well, start a mock government club. Maybe actually go in and write bills or go in and debate things, or maybe you want to start a debate club if that's more your thing, right? where you can get people on the other side being the opposition, respectfully arguing against you and trying to help you better your idea while you better theirs, with trained referees and trained people listening and actual democratic votes. Like, it's the best chance for you to take the time to explore your interests and to really understand yourself and understand those around you while making friends and just getting better at something. And it can even be things that are more relevant to your degree. Maybe you're in physics and you want an astronomy club, so you can go look through telescopes and study stars in ways your classes aren't doing it. Great, go do it. Get other people into it. Get a room. Get the university's approval and start that club and get it done. Or maybe you see a club and you're like, hey, I would love to be a leader of that club. Go join that club. Go be an active part of it. And when voting for the new leaders come around, announce your candidacy to be one of the leaders. And if you get voted in, there you go. You now have something for a resume if you just put your time into it. And that's the important thing about these clubs. They're not confined to tests and to assignments and to anything like that. They are a free-flowing, like almost living body within your university where you can explore anything you would like and explore your interests and still get things on resumes. It's the best way to take your unproductive habit and make it a productive activity each week that goes on a resume while you're still doing almost exactly the same thing. That's the amazing part of these clubs. And I know I'm getting so much into this without really going anywhere, but I need to stress how important clubs and societies are at university. And while I'm talking specifically about special interests now, the same thing goes for sports, while they're more organized by university. Same thing goes for cultural groups if the culture is what you're passionate about, right? I know there's plenty of people passionate about Japanese culture, plenty of people passionate about Korean culture, and plenty of people passionate about the Russian and German cultures especially. I know those are the main four that I see, but still, well, you can just start your club that is about those cultures, right? You might be really passionate about mathematics, and mathematics is your thing. There's a mathematics society that you can join, and they're called societies because they're usually linked with the actual academic program and with the professors and have more resources in the way, so they have a bit of a leg up, but they're also more structured and have more rules usually, right? Versus a normal club, which is just run by the students who organize it however they want. But whatever your club is, whether you start it or join it, it is the perfect thing to do at university. You get a better friend group, you get to spend time doing things you love, and it's still productive, and you're being active in university, and you can put these things in applications, you can put these things on resumes, and if you want to get a higher post in university, maybe you want to join the university student union and you have to be elected, well, hey, you did this club, this club, this club, and this club, and this club, and you're 3 years that you were there, now that you're in your fourth, right? Well, there you go. You just tripled your chance of being elected because people will look at you and either they'll know your name or they will know that you're so active in university that you know exactly how this type of stuff should work. So you get a lot of credibility to your name. You get a lot of importance to your name. And all you're doing is the same activities that you were doing just at home or on Skype or on computer, right? Or maybe just alone. You're getting the same you're getting credibility, you're getting your name out there for doing the same things, right? And even if you're not doing the same things, this is also your chance to try to explore something more difficult. Maybe you're like, hey, I like debating, but I want to try to create this big organized debate group that actually does competitions and does events and really try out being a leader while also doing debate. Then do it. Start a debate club or join the debate club and take a leadership position. You now gain leadership skills, organizational skills, and so much more, and you still get to debate. It's a win-win scenario. There's no loss in these clubs because you're never going to have a chance to look at clubs like this again when you're done university or even when you're just done your undergraduate degree. So take the chance to explore them now. Take a chance to look at your interests and have fun with your interests and love your interests because university is the best time to do it. Now, I know this has been a long discussion and passionate discussion about clubs. There is still the idea of how do you create your own club? So we'll take this last little bit of time to calm down and really discuss creating your own club before we end off the episode. So creating your own club in university is a lot different than creating your club in high school. In high school, it's probably you just told your school, hey, I want to start a club, here's what I want to do, and they're like, great. Or maybe you had to actually put in an application saying all the stuff with a teacher sponsor, but in the end, it was still closer to your university or your high school being like, great. Well, in university, the clubs, especially in a big university, these clubs are run quite a bit differently. Universities take their clubs very seriously. They take their clubs as an extension of the university because if they're approved by the university, they are. So the club process is usually something like this. You'll go onto your student union website or your university website and look for a page talking about the clubs. If not, that's okay. It's not too important. And in this time, you'll find the rules and regulations for a club. You can also email a university official and just get your way to getting all those regulations. Some universities, or most universities, actually run them under the student union. So keep in mind that you'll probably have to talk more with your student union than with your university directly, because your student union does represent this exact type of situation. And what you'll do is you'll find the rules for the Constitution. And your Constitution will be written by yourself, which will state in a more general sense, kind of like a legal document, this is the club, this is what it will do, these are the leaders, this is each form of leadership role that someone is allowed to take in a club. Here's how we choose leaders, which is normally done through a democratic vote that your university will decide, but not all universities require this, from what I can tell. And this is how the club is planned to function over this set of time, and that's it. And this constitution will run just as the foundations for your club. You'll submit this to your university's student union, most likely, and they will check it over, vote on it, and if you get voted in, congrats, you've now formed a club. Now, your job is to get other people who will join the club and other people who will be executive members of the club. And once you get that done, well, you're now all good to be running your club. It's not actually that hard of a process. All you need is just to write the Constitution, like a legal document, which just explains a bit of what your club is doing. And I've just written one for a debate club recently, so I'll try to remember to throw that link to the description. If not, put a comment about it and I'll add it in after. And that document there will have a good basis for what to expect when you make your own club. Right, and when you need to write your constitution. And following that, you might want to look into some funding for your club. Some universities, or most I would hope, or hopefully all, have the chance for a club to access funding from their student union, which this funding can then be used towards club activities. Maybe you want uniforms, maybe you want particular tools or instruments. You can start a musical club, so instruments are not out of the question. Maybe you want particular, I don't know, maybe you want to do competitions, you need money for travel. Well, your university can fund that. You can apply for funding. I know my university has $200 startup funds just to run the club, right? Just to get everything off the ground, make sure you have all the tools you'll need. If you're running a debate club, you probably won't need as much as if you're running, like, let's say a computer club or a blockchain club or a video game club. And if you're running a book club, you can use this money to buy books for your club to use, for example, right? And then you can apply probably for club funding. You can apply for funding within faculties, within other areas, and get some funding for your club through the application process. Now, your university will define this for themselves on how it should be done, so it's not my grounds to state, here's how you do it, here's what you do. And instead, it's best to look through your university and send out the emails and figure out exactly where to get it. And the best place to start is a page about clubs on your university website. And once you get this, and you get the funding, you get your executive, you have the club started, from there, it's in your hands. Maybe you want to make some posters and try to get people in. Maybe you want to make Facebook posts. Maybe you want to go just telling everyone, get it by word of mouth and get something interesting. Maybe you want to advertise it in every way you know how and make it a video series about it. You can do that. You can really do it however you want. And from here, it's in your hands to get people into the club and just get working on your activity. Maybe you already had a group of people who wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons, and now, guess what? 3 of them have leadership positions, 3 of them basically have leadership positions, and you're still doing the exact same thing, except now you're officially meeting in a new area, right? Maybe you don't do much besides that. Well, great. You now have a leadership role. You now have your club done. You don't even need the funding if you already have the stuff. You don't need to apply for it. Or maybe you want to apply for the funding just so you can buy some new books for your D&D games. You know what? That's perfectly fair, because in the process, you also might get other people who will see the club and say, hey, I want to do this, and they can join the club, and now you have a new member for your D&D games who you can teach and who you can get into D&D and really help them understand it and get a new devoted member who might make your games significantly more fun, right? And that's the beauty of these clubs. They're the chance to meet other people, and it's a chance to get leadership experience working with legal documents and working with so many things. And in the end, you're still just having fun doing what you love. So that's a bit on what clubs are like in university, how to start a club, and what to expect from them. From here, we're going to move into our outro segment for the episode, and then we'll be ending off from there. So, we come to the end of the 3rd episode of Unicast, the University Podcast. Next week, we'll be discussing a bit more on homework and assignments that we discussed in the previous episode, and we'll be discussing your first tests and exams, most likely your midterms. I've been your host, Flux, and please remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you're from YouTube, and recommend the show to friends, family, or anyone else you may want. It seriously helps in more ways than you could ever imagine. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.